can see that. You know, if they've got in-person classes, and many of them have in-person classes at 5 tonight, so we'll allow them to get off. So as we're waiting for people to come in, just I'll do one introduction on our series. So this is the first. I'm really glad you could come, and we've got a great guest that you'll see in this session. This is a series that we started last semester, which I've broadly entitled "What's the Nature of Business in the Post-COVID World?" We'll get at that in different directions, but it comes from a view that, you know, irrespective of what's happening, we've probably got several crises that are happening in the world, several bits of transformation. The business world is changing. It's going to change. And it's really important for our students to understand what's the nature of these changes so that they can align their careers. I know our students, you know, all of you know this, but Jonathan, just remind you, you've met some of our students that are by and large working professionals, already got careers. So some of them are here getting new careers, enhancing their careers, redesigning their careers. Important to understand what the shape of business is going to be going forward, and equally important for our faculty as we're shaping curriculum, that we're shaping it in the way that's going to be, you know, going to give our students a leg up as we go on. And so we have this session with our students, our faculty, our business colleagues, and we have a new guest most weeks. And so I publicized a series. We're going to have about 7-8 guests this semester, and we'll have a couple of weeks break and won't have any in May. And we're going to be looking at this question from a variety of points of view, from the point of view today of really about possibilities in business transformation and venturing, and looking at global, you know, what's happening around the globe with emerging countries and entrepreneurship there, to looking at what's happened in Baltimore itself. I think we're going to have a lot of different points of view. And so I'm going to, you know, and remind people our format today. I'm going to spend about 15 minutes talking to our guests. It's probably not enough for this particular guest because he's got so much learning. We just had a session with him with some of our entrepreneurship students, and I think we all learned a lot. And in that 1 hour, it was great. And then I'm going to give you the chance really to interact with each other and ask questions and have discussions about what we're discussing, either this topics, what we're discussing today, or the topics about what's going to happen post-pandemic world. And then there's a chance for you to post questions. We'll try and get through these questions as much as we can in the last 15, 20 minutes. We make this highly interactive. And so really our guest today is, I'm really pleased to introduce him, as Jonathan Roberts. Jonathan is a founder and partner at Ignition Partners, which is actually the Northwest's largest venture capital firm. It's got more than $3 billion committed capital. It's got funds committed here and in Asia, and focuses its investments on software companies. Some of these companies will be familiar to you: Splunk, DocuSign, particularly. And we're going to talk about DocuSign, Cloudera, and Jonathan has led a number of these investments, and he served actually on the board of DocuSign for 15 years. He's also the co-founder of RPrime, and we're going to talk about RPrime also today, which is a not-for-profit that uses digital platform with a powerful suite of tools that connect and deepen, expand relationships for civic faith-based organizations. Jonathan serves on multiple boards. He's very connected with the University of Washington, which is his where he's an alumnus in history, actually. He's also on the National Bureau of Asian Research, the APL School, and he's done some remarkable work. I was privileged to meet Jonathan in March, introduced by our board member, Philip Niedermeyer, and a couple of other business contacts on a particular endeavor that some of our students have been working on. We'll talk about a little bit about that as we talk about RPrime and where that fits, and we might even talk longer about it. So, Jonathan, you'll find, is a wonderful, innovative thinker. So I'm going to just go on and start. And Jonathan, if I missed out anything in your career that you think I should correct, you can correct me. But I'm going to. I really want to focus on two things because there's so much learning. But DocuSign happens to be one of my favorite pieces of software. I think that it's probably the most useful piece of software that I have access to at the moment, particularly being remote, particularly since I haven't replaced my printer in my house. And so I'd like to start, but when we met a few weeks ago, I was actually interested in the fact that you were on the board for 15 years, and I've got the impression, VC investments we think you were quite early in, and maybe you can talk about how early you were in, but you were in there for quite a long time. So this wasn't one of these 5 years and out sort of deal. So maybe take through, with DocuSign, how you got in, what attracted to you, but also a couple of key moments that become learning points that affect the way you think about ventures. Okay, so maybe start with, how did you get into it, and when did you get into it?
Well, I got into it a long time ago. The truth be told, I went to the university with the founder of DocuSign, a guy named Tom Gonzer, and Tom reached out to me and had me look at his business, and I passed because he wanted to take digital signatures and essentially attack FedEx just because it was better, cheaper, faster than putting things in an envelope. And I told him that I didn't like channel plays, that I didn't like disrupting end user behavior, and that I encouraged them to look at add-on plays. In other words, how to attach to existing business processes. So I'll step back and say, my key learning from Microsoft, so I was a Windows product manager, was that Bill Gates figured out how to get other people to sell his stuff. And he did it by allowing applications to use his platform as a runtime, and he bundled it with hardware. So, and so that was the key insight. So I looked at that insight and said, what's the equivalent in the digital world? And the equivalent is to hook an API, an application programming interface, and become part of an existing business process. So they came back to me 9 months later with a deal with a company called ZipForm, which is a commercial real estate document processing company, where they hooked an API and then they completed the transaction process. So the insight is, how do you connect to a pre-existing business process so as not to disrupt end user behavior? You just want to slide in. And that's when I decided to invest. And when I left the board a few months after they went public, which is what the early stage guys do, 70% of their signature volume was through solutions where they had hooked an API, where we were built into a pre-existing business process. So that thesis actually turned out to be the thesis that drove the whole business. There's a lot of lessons learned. We had 5 CEOs. I hired and fired a bunch of them. I was acting CEO once, very operational. There were 4 or 5 years where there was not a single increase in share price. Any venture capital firm worth their salt would have killed the deal multiple times because we violated every principle of venture capital. But all's well that ends well. So here we are.
And so you're if you take DocuSign again, we were talking to the students earlier on about how you saw yourself, what you saw venture capital doing, and your models of risk. Maybe explain your what you saw. Where do you explain to the students about your models of risk, but also maybe tell a little bit about how it played out in DocuSign over the years, over these years.
Well, I'm sorry for those that just sat through the earlier discussion, because this will be a little redundant. I'm looking at Brian, who I recognize from the last session. But in the venture capital business, and I would stipulate in any business, there are three types of risk. Market risk, which is there a market? Can you get fully deployed customers? Model risk, which is, can you create a model where you can scale the operation? And that's where product management fits: pricing, packaging, positioning, promotion, licensing, et cetera. And then execution risk. And the key thing is to take each risk out sequentially. So what people try to do is they try to go out and get as many pilots as possible and run, and they end up getting very broadly deployed, but not deeply adopted. And so the lesson is to go deep before you go broad. Have a number of customers, because you never know who's going to flake out or not proceed, but then really focus on getting fully deployed customers, because all the bad stuff happens deep down. And I would tell you, the founder of DocuSign, his greatest regret is that we took in a Series B where his co-founder, they scaled too quick, took in too much money, and then had to take on additional capital that was very dilutive to him prior to proving out the concept. They just spent too much money too early. And that's essentially a lesson that almost every company learns. So one of many lessons. But I would encourage you to think about these risks. And I would argue, when I serve on boards that are large boards, those type of risks exist in every organization. And you simply can't skip steps. So that's a key learning that's applicable to everyone.
And if you think of what we're just going through in the world of the pandemic and what's happening to business, are there particular opportunities that you see or almost crying out for somebody to take on this testing of market risk?
Well, whenever there's dramatic change, there's opportunity. And the company that I license for my not-for-profit, it's called Navigator CRE, and they're in commercial real estate. And commercial real estate is in a world of hurt right now. But for a company that does big data analysis and digital dashboards and things, it's a great time to help them, because they need to make a lot of decisions. And so whenever there's a crisis, there's opportunity. And so I tend to view everything as an opportunity.
And you've transitioned in the last couple of years from from still being on boards and being interested in pulling out these developments, these venture developments, to applying your views about this digital world and relationships to solving societal problems, right? And so maybe say a little bit of that about RPrime and how that fits into this picture and how you see that development.
Well, I think, like probably everybody, I'm a little distressed by the state of the world, and have been for a long time. And so up to 4 years ago, I started to draft thoughts about what the new Truman Doctrine would be, right? What do we do after the post-war Cold War construct? And I banged around and talked to an awful lot of people about it, and essentially wrote, terrible master's thesis type stuff that bored even me. And so then I stepped back and I thought about, what's the operating mechanism of positive change, right? Just how, at its very core level, how have things got to a better place? And I was deeply informed by the example of William Wilberforce, who did the abolition of slavery and the reformation of manners in the UK in the 1790s, sort of culminating in the abolition of the slave trade in 1807 for the British Empire, and an example for Abraham Lincoln. And when you reverse engineer that, what you see is positive change was organic, that it was individuals clumping together with other individuals of very different types. It was sort of radically inclusive. And then that, they literally changed the fabric of society. And that left me with the impression that positive change is driven bottoms up. I would argue the same motif applies to the civil rights, women's suffrage, almost every, I can't think of an alternative case that positive change is not driven bottoms up by inclusive communities connecting with other inclusive communities. Negative change can be driven top down. And so then if you say, okay, if that's it, what's the operating mechanism of these relationships? And that's one group respecting another group, and where there's injury, that you need reconciliation. And so that's the basis of RPrime, which stands for relationship is primary. And it's the notion that you take digital platforms and use them to drive people into physical relationships. And so essentially what we've taken is the power of Amazon or Netflix, where you're using big data to give people a curated experience, but we're putting that below organizations. So if you consider Amazon is it's a classic consumer play, right? You all go to Amazon and you all buy, and they know a lot about you. My belief is that in order to drive people in the physical relationship, it needs to be a channel play. So I'll give you an example. As Murray mentioned, I'm super involved with the University of Washington. And so I was involved in advising, which is code word for fundraising, for the Autism Center. And the University of Washington and Children's Hospital wanted to reach out to families affected by autism in the state of Washington, about 100,000 families, and help them navigate the issues around autism, which are significant, and connect to services and diagnose and create forums and community and all this kind of stuff. And their plan, which I read, was completely awful. And they wanted to create a portal and all this kind of stuff. And I finally lost my mind in a meeting and said, you guys are Yahoo 1990. People don't build portals anymore. This is ridiculous. You need to use, big data, machine learning, all this kind of stuff. And it just so happens I've created a not-for-profit that licenses that software, and we're off to the races doing that. We're going to do a similar version for mental health. But the notion is broadly applied. Use this capability to drive people into physical relationship and then manage processes. Give normal organizations the same power that Amazon and Netflix have. And over time, hopefully create a concept where, RPrime, like Google, like DocuSign, could become a verb where we want to RPrime a relationship. We want to put the relationship above our objective, the relationship above our tribal interest. We'll see how far we get, but and I went on too long, Murray, and I apologize.
No, this is great. There's a lot of meat there, and so what I want to do now is I want to create these interactive groups. Those of you who haven't been here before, I'll just those of you who were here last semester are tired of me talking about this, but these are going to be totally random. Students are going to be in with faculty, faculty in with business people. If you're in with faculty, this is no grading on this, okay? You've got equal voice, okay? You've probably got more important voice, okay? So this is basically having a discussion about these topics, what you've heard, come back with questions, and also come back with questions also, if there's any other issues that, you've seen Jonathan's background, other issues that you want to address there. And then we'll finish off the last 20 minutes. So I'm going to do this. As I said, Jonathan's going to go to one group, and but as I say, I just do this totally randomly, and we're going to create a Yeah, we create about 7 or 8 groups. They'll do it. Okay, so I'm going to put you down there. I'll give you a warning when it's about 2 minutes to come back. Okay.
Oh, that's fun.
All right.
Good.
Wow, very slick.
So if you could start posting questions, that would be good. Wherever I'll recognize people and I'll start.
Hey, Murray, I'm technologically challenged, so I'm not finding the button to post the question. But, you know, can you guys hear me?
Mhm.
Yeah, Jerry Collier, sir. Hey, we were just speaking. You spoke about the not-for-profits and about autism. And so one of the things, I'm the chairman of the board of Anne Arundel Medical, which is a local hospital. It's the biggest not-for-profit in Anne Arundel County here in Maryland. Anne Arundel County is the state capital.
And a fine hospital at that, I might add.
I'm sorry?
And a fine hospital at that, I might add.
I would say the best as the chair of the board. But one of the things that I got exposed to, we opened up a new mental health facility within the past year, and I was instrumental in the the fundraising around that. And the sort of the lack of availability of mental health treatment facilities, clinicians, and what have you. What's your view as to a market, an entrepreneurial market, to be able to address that, given, you know, the reimbursement systems? There's just a terrible intersection between clinicians, facilities, reimbursement, and an ever exploding need, you know, evolve with what I would call traditional mental health challenges, as well as addiction that in most cases leads to more traditional mental health challenges.
Well, first, you know, I pride myself on knowing what I don't know, and the complexity of reimbursement and insurance models and all that, I don't presume to have unique insight. But I will say the following 2 things. The first is, you know, the model that I have is, it presumes that we have a partner like your hospital, University of Washington, Children's Hospital, et cetera, that are domain experts, because we're really just a tool. And so we need to partner with people that know the domain and actually provide the services. The second observation, you know, I frankly wasn't going to focus on mental health until we had completed autism and had that fully deployed. But I sit on an advisory board for, you know, mental health, and just at least in the state of Washington, it's just a total catastrophe. Particularly amongst kids, suicide rates, everything. I mean, you know, and then the production of clinicians that can help is like 4% versus the demand. It just complete debacle. So you look at that and say, wow, we've got to apply big data to help with diagnosis and route people towards services. And more importantly, we need to start creating local forums so people can start sharing and finding community to get support, because the professional support system can't keep up with the demand. And then plus there's tons of data join problems with all the disparate data between the agencies. And so what I know is you need to create an ecosystem response where multiple parties are interacting with each other in a productive way. And that's what I learned from Microsoft. Windows created the PC economy, that and the Intel processor, right? So I always think about ecosystems. How can various pieces work together in a semi-coordinated way? And so what I'm trying to do with RPrime is use the best of breed technology to help create ecosystems for various civic use cases. I don't think I answered your question.
No, I think you did, right? Because one of the things as a board member that I speak about is exactly what you said. This ecosystem we have, the data, the degrees of freedom in the data. There are folks like yourself that we could partner with that we don't have to be the expert on. And whether it ultimately results in an artificial intelligence model or what have you, that's the sort of the answer to some of this, as opposed to sort of the old way of doing things. You know, you talked earlier about Gates, but working with people where he would sell their stuff for them. It's sort of the same thing as a healthcare provider. You don't have to have the technology answer. As a technology answer, provider of a technology answer, you don't have to own the patients in the data, right? But when you bring that together, you come up with an effective and efficient way of doing business that's different than the way we have done it historically, which is human intensive.
Right, that's right. And I, you know, honestly, as I've thought a lot about this whole vaccine distribution problem, hospitals don't create demand signal. They don't, as a rule, it's not their function to be building community or generating demand. They respond to demand. People get sick and they go to the hospital. And so the tool, almost every vertical market tends to think they're so unique that they've got to create their own tools. And I've spent an entire career applying general tools to vertical markets that can get tuned towards the market. And I think there's a lot in the healthcare field that can be borrowed from other markets, is I guess, the takeaway point.
Thank you.
Yeah. You're on mute, Murray.
I'm not sure what's happening. Somebody is putting me on mute automatically, I think. Sorry about that. Yeah, a couple of markets that maybe you could comment on. Tori is one of our students. I think you met her earlier on, asked about maker communities, you know, which you've been involved in, but how to make and how to reach and build support for maker communities so they can particularly navigate issues around scalability, which is not something we discussed earlier. So maybe address that question first, and then I'll go on to the second one, so you got that in mind. So this is about, maybe you want to explain to people what maker communities are and what you've been doing with them as well, okay? Just as a backdrop, okay?
Well, so we did Maker Mask, and Philip, who I see on this, was a great participant in helping with this effort. So these 3D printable masks, this is actually a silicon version. This mask specifically was put up on the internet free of charge, downloaded in 160 countries, 12,000 members signed in to then download the files. We think 150,000 or more of these were printed. The current version is about to go to market on Amazon, which is a silicon soft, beautiful thing. But what we have as a result of this is a view of, and about 15 to 20% are people that had multiple printers. So I call that small batch production. We have the most complete global view of small batch production sites in the world. And so a concept was to create a maker network building on Maker Mask that by location, this is really more of a global outreach notion, you connect these local small batch production sites with NGOs, with the local community to service needs like repairing equipment, building masks. We actually have a version of a ventilator, but it could be anything, right? That the notion of maker networks is hyper local, engaged by community, connecting these things. And you know, that's just a concept. You know, we have the small batch production sites. We need to put the other pieces of the puzzle together. So it's kind of on my to-do list. It's a big problem, but we'll get back to it. And in terms of, I don't really have any unique insight on how to create hobbyist evangelism. You know, I'm more of an enterprise sales guy, so I apologize that not to be that guy.
Mm-hmm. And we had a couple of these sites in Baltimore, you know, from students at University of Baltimore, I would say. So so thank you for the opportunity. It was Tori was also asking, and I'm going to get to a couple other questions, but about sustainable business models, and I presume you mean business models that are about the sustainable economy. Is that right, Tori?
Not specifically. Like in our group, we started to talk about Keurig and how I was recommending using reusable Keurig cups. But one of my professors who was in our group was talking about, or someone else in our group was talking about how they designed a scanner system so that those reusable Keurigs are not compatible with their new models. So that's, you know, an unsustainable business model in terms of the environmental, but you know, I'm talking about it in a broad sense. Yeah. Thank you.
So you're looking at your question specifically was, can you use, you know, well, that's a good explanation, you know, that you're looking for business models that are going to support the sustainable economies. And you know, one of the things that the Keurig example raised was whether government regulation could guide better business practices, or whether there's other ways of sort of tackling that kind of issue. So,
well, I think it's a tangential thought, but I'll relay my view of the key to sales. So I'll double back on your thoughts so you'll see that there's some loose relevance to my comments. Think of the product that you're selling as a dot. It's what you're doing. The question in the thought exercise is, what are the dots that precede your dot, that are before your dot? The definition of the dot is a decision the customer you're selling to has made prior to you. So in the case of DocuSign, they've got an online SaaS process, right? It's an online process. They're probably cloud, they're probably mobile. And unless you were doing those things, you wouldn't use a digital signature. So then you have to say, what's the initiative that connects all those dots? And in the case of DocuSign, it was digital transformation. In your case, it might be sustainability, right? So what you're trying to do is be aligned with decisions the customer has made prior to using you, and then connect to that trend. Entrepreneurs all too often just like to talk about their dot. And it has one of two effects. It either is insulting to the customer because you're calling them an idiot, or you succeed in persuading the customer that they don't know what they're doing, in which case they also don't feel comfortable buying. Both things don't help you. What you want to do is connect with decisions they've made prior to you. So you're affirming, then you assert. You should always work on 3 affirmations before an assertion. That's all I know about enterprise sales.
maybe a good kind of follow on to that, you know, is, and I know you're not in, on the board of DocuSign anymore, but one group was asking a question about whether the next step on DocuSign was about being able to identify identities, that is the digital signature really secure enough? And is there, is that the next set of businesses is really much more about this verifying identities?
Well, technically speaking, you can have 2-factor or 3-factor authentication on DocuSign so that you can even get biometric authentication on who you are. So that there's no unique, they're doing fairly standard practice on that. I did see the question in terms of where they're going. When I left, keep in mind, what the hell do I know? I left when they were worth they were trading at $35 a share. They're now at $241. So clearly the people that took over know what they're doing. But when I left, we were focused on becoming transaction management, which is essentially, there's customer relationship management, there's ERP. They were trying to create their own category of managing every aspect of the transaction, that you would plug that more holistically into a business process. So all the process, it drifts into contract management basically, but it's just narrowly focused on transaction. So it's always good to define a category, try to own the category, and plug into adjacent categories versus go too broad. Can you define something that's coherent enough that you can own it? And that was the discussions we were having when I left.
Mhm. Now this is probably going to be probably the second last question, because I get to ask the last question, but it's and I think Philip Niedermeyer raised this, but you said earlier on, you made a statement that about RPrime, that you put the relationship beyond the tribal interest, so expand a little bit about that, a little bit more depth of what you meant by that.
This is a great book. Jonathan Sacks, The Dignity of Difference, former chief rabbi of the UK, just an incredible guy, just recently died, unfortunately. He has a great notion, which is people are wired to connect to their communities. And that what you want to do is encourage that connection. He takes a religious orientation towards it, but I could take a broader orientation towards it, civically or ethnically or whatever the case may be. And then respect other people and other organizations, right? And other traditions. So it's a function of deep connection and respect. The alternative is what he calls universalism, which is basically, let's all subscribe to the same unifying concept, which generally means agree with me or I kill you. And that has been religions, certainly Christianity, Islam have done that. Communism has done that. Various forms of socialism have done that. And essentially, it's you're either going to be a universalist or you're going to be someone who subscribes to the dignity of difference orientation, where deep connection and respect. I don't think there's any proof point of universalism working. So I'm going to go with Jonathan Sacks' construct.
And so this is my question, and then we'll sort of wrap it up. But maybe this would be your advice to our students, but this is also probably advice to faculty as well. If they're going out to this world and they're going to be enhancing their career, rebuilding their careers, launching new careers, what do they need to have learned to know and take to that world, in your view?
You've confused me for a sage. I'm just a marketing guy.
No.
No, I'll give you my my quick career construct, which is there's 3 dials to your career.
Mm-hmm.
The first dial is your skill set, marketing, engineering, sales, law, finance. I mean, you're going to develop a basket of skills. The second dial is the industry in which you focus. Education, government, finance, whatever. And the third dial is the company or organization for whom you work. Career management is about changing those dials. And so what you want to do is the next construct is sailing, right? You're going to set a bearing. I want to go here. And then you're going to tack your way to that location based on opportunity, prevailing conditions, whatever the case may be. And what you're doing on each of those tacks is turning those dials. And when you're applying for a job, you're trying to convince the person hiring you that he or she, that you are not turning the dial as much as you are. Listen, my experience is more relevant than you think, because what I did here applies here in a way that you're not seeing it. So, and then something that's somewhat counter to that, this great book I read recently called Range, which is a New York Times bestseller on the value of being a generalist and essentially pattern matching and analogies towards your use case, right? I think it's great to continue. I mean, I love your school because you're engaged in the real world, right? You bring real world knowledge. And what I want to encourage you to do is never discount that. But I hope that these, and I've kind of made a career of what I call the imposter syndrome. which is not being completely uninformed and knowing nothing about what I'm attempting to do has never been an impediment. You just keep iterating slowly and working with people that do know what they're doing and applying your paradigms and trying to make progress with as much humility as you can muster. So that's a long answer to a short question, but the sailing metaphor, the 3 dials, and then this notion of general pattern matching and a little bit of persistence serves us all well.
Thank you. Now, before we finish, there's going to be 3 things. One is I'm going to make a little apology to Lee Dimer because I know you just posted a question. It's a very deep question, and I think it's a good technology. And I think it might be actually a double apology because I actually believe I did this to you before. I know I did this to somebody before, so I promise I'll connect you with Jonathan and that question. And my second last thing, we have a tradition for this series established 2 minutes ago that I asked one of my board members to rather than me make the closing comments and word of thanks for one of my board members to do it. So this week I'm calling on Philip Niedermeyer, who you know already, Jonathan, to just make a couple of closing comments, and then I got one announcement, and then we'll be finished. But I appreciate it. Okay, Philip.
So Jonathan, you're my friend, so it's always embarrassing to thank friends, but what a privilege it has been to get to know you this year and to see you implement the theories that you paint such vivid, stark pictures of in the words you speak. And that's a huge compliment to you, because I remember our first conversation, which we had scheduled for half an hour and lasted almost 3 hours. And in that conversation, we got into many topics. And today you've shared your vision in a concise way with our audience. And I'd like to end by just thanking you in these terms. You make the value of being a generalist starkly aware to your audience today. And I would want to add an exclamation point to that by taking these core principles that you summarized, the sailing conscript, those 3 dials, the general pattern matching of people to people, and of course, persistence can be the difference maker. And you and I know from the work we've done together, the great value in persistence and also the frustration in it. Because if we had only overcome that barrier with the early days of Navigator CRE, sadly, I think we would have saved a lot of lives. But we did as much as we possibly could do without going down and kicking the White House door down to get that on board. But your persistence makes a difference. You're a great inspiring leader, and you do it in a way that's calm, casual, and to the point and brief. And we're very fortunate to have you with us today. And I'm even more fortunate to call you my friend. So thank you for joining the University of Baltimore's team with the dean. That should have been tea with the dean, but somebody got it wrong, but it all worked out right. And that's how it sometimes just is. And thank you so much for coming today, Jonathan.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, it was great. So we'll give you a digital clap. It's fantastic. Thank you very much, Philip. I couldn't have said it better. Thank you. And I just want to remind you, the next session is not actually next week, but it's on the 16th of February. And our guest then is going to be Carlisle Singer, who's the president of Acumen, which is an organization I worked with for about 14 years. Its focus is focused on alleviating poverty around the world, primarily through developing entrepreneurs. Some of you might remember we did have the US manager a few years ago as one of our guests. And we're going to really be exploring what's been happening in the emerging world, particularly in the pandemic, and what some of the responses are going to be as well. I think you'll find Carlisle, who's got a great business experience, very inspiring as well. So thank you very much for coming, and Jonathan. Again, thank you, and thank you everybody. Bye.
Thank you.